So my name is Fergus. I'm one of the directors of Montreal Irish Monument Park Foundation. And our objective, of course, is to build a beautiful park around the area of what's called the Black Rock. And behind me is a replica of the Black Rock, which was put there in 1859 to remember the events of Black 47. In 1847, more than 6,000 Irish died and were buried in the area. But interesting enough, my own family arrived in Montreal with another very large wave of Irish immigrants, which was around 1825. They were leaving mainly for economic reasons, having to do a little bit with the end of the Napoleonic War and not needing as much farmers as they used to. And they arrived in Montreal around 1825, 1830. They started to dominate the Catholic Church, which was generally French-speaking at that time. It was pretty easy in Montreal. If you were English, you were Protestant. If you were French, you were Catholic, and that seemed pretty simple until the Irish showed up, who were basically, well, they were speaking Irish, of course, but they also spoke some English. And so the Catholic Church wasn't sure what to do about all these Irish people. So what ended up happening is there was a gentleman by the name of Father Patrick Phelan. Father Phelan was brought up from the States to administer on behalf of the Catholic Church in Montreal, to administer directly to the Irish. He was a member of the Sulpicians, the gentlemen of St. Sulpice, and they happened to own some land in the Lower Laurentians, about 70 miles northwest here of Montreal. And he arranged that land be given to the farmers, the Irish farmers who had arrived around 1820, 1830, and they went ahead and they set up their own community. Until about the First World War, around 1912, that community of Saint-Columban was almost 100% Irish and Catholic. Of course, over the years now, and after the train arrived in 1850 or so, some of the Irish started to disperse to other parts of Canada and certainly into the United States of America. So in the end, around, if we're talking about the famine here, around 1847, which, like I say, is about 25 years after people kind of arrived in Saint-Columban, you see in the records of Saint-Columban where some people, some of the Irish from the famine, found their way to this very Irish community outside of Montreal. The records don't directly indicate it, but you do notice in 1848 seems like more deaths occurred in 1847. So it is a possibility that some of the people from the famine of 1848 went up to Saint-Columban and perhaps brought along the dreaded disease with them. So Saint-Columban continued to operate for any number of years, and recently we were involved in a project where we took all the tombstones within the community and encased them in a couple of walls as a remembrance to the Irish and the Irish heritage of Saint-Columban. And Saint-Columban actually over the last few years has had Irish Heritage Day, even though the majority, as I say, are French speaking and many of them not related to the Irish in any way. They realize that that is the history of the community. So my own family came. One interesting point about them is in 1837, there was the rebellion of Lower Canada, in which what they call the Patriots were fighting the British-controlled appointed people here. And most of the Irish in Saint-Columban, including my great-great-grandfather, were on the side of the Patriot. Something that's not always well known in Quebec, where they think it might have been more French and English, where in actual fact it was an argument over who was going to control the purse strings and who was going to have the power in Lower Canada at the time. So that's my story, how my ancestors got here and remained here. My mother was an O'Connor, and so I'm really 100% Irish heritage, and I'm living in Montreal, and I'm involved in now trying to build the memorial park around the Black Rock here in Montreal. Thank you. Yeah, so again, my name is Fergus, and I'm with the Montreal Irish Monument Park Foundation. And we're speaking to you, of course, from Montreal, Quebec, Canada. I happen to live in an area that's known as Pointe-Saint-Charles, generally just called The Point. And this was an old working class area of Montreal. Across the river is Griffintown, which was another area mainly Irish. So when the Irish arrived here early in the 1820s, before the famine, about 25 years before the famine or so, many of them took up jobs. There's a canal that runs called the Lachine Canal, which was a very important gateway to trade and commerce. And it was built almost entirely by the Irish living in either Pointe-Saint-Charles or Griffintown. There's a course at the end of the Black Rock was put in place in 1859 by the workers of the Victoria Bridge, and they again were almost entirely Irish, most of them immigrants from 1825, and when it went on in 1859, we suspect, of course, some of the survivors of 1847 also worked on the bridge at that time. And they were the ones that were responsible for pulling out the Black Rock that you see behind me in memory of the 6,000 Irish that died and were buried in that spot during the great famine of Black 47. So the neighborhood, Pointe-Saint-Charles, interesting. Generally, most Montrealers realized that it really had a very big Irish content. Along the Lachine Canal, as I mentioned, were any number of businesses, large companies at that time, depending on the water power from the Lachine Canal, and many of them, some well-known names like Northern Telecom, employed any number of people of Irish heritage from here in our neighborhood. There was also at one part of the neighborhood an area called CNR, or train, where they did a lot of repairs on the trains, and interesting enough, that came out of the Grand Trunk Railway, and the Grand Trunk Railway was very much involved in the Victoria Bridge, and very much involved in this whole Black Rock incident of Black 47. So it's become of course, over the years, with more immigration, Pointe-Saint-Charles changed to some degree, but it's still considered a very Irish area. And it's a great place to live. It's right near downtown. You just walk up the hill and you're in downtown Montreal. So I'm very pleased to live here in Pointe-Saint-Charles. Thanks.